Before I really get into the meat of this, before I get started, I just want to say that I'm not sure what I'm about to say. And I'm not sure if anybody's going to be able to take anything away from this. For this channel, it was always about me being able to just kind of empty my head. It's more of a way to vent. And if somebody gets something out of it, then great. I don't, sometimes I sit around and I think too much about like, oh, what would people be interested in? And I think too much about what it is that I'm going to say. And I don't want that to be this channel. For better or worse, I want to be able to just talk, speak my mind. However I come off, whether I come off ignorant, like a genius, whatever. Whether somebody finds this entertaining, boring, it is what it is. Okay, so that out of the way, I'm going to talk about some kind of deep and heavy stuff regarding religion. Or not so much religion, but I hate the term spirituality. We've all heard these people talk, oh, I'm not religious, but I'm spiritual. I don't know. Let me just pump the brakes right there, because I already feel myself getting a little bit tangled up. Let me just give you a little bit of background, and maybe we can start at the beginning. If you're with me for this, great. If not, fine. I get it. Who am I? You don't know me. There's no reason that you should be interested in my story, but nevertheless, I have to kind of get it out there. So I was born in 1980, for whatever that's worth. And for roughly the first 20 years of my life, I was raised in a religious household. I'd say by the time I was, 17, 18, I'm in my late teens. That's when you start getting into trouble. You start fucking around or whatever. But even then, when I was doing bad shit, like, getting into drugs and partying and all that, I still maintained my belief in God. Maybe I wasn't going to church every week anymore, but I still identified as a Christian. But yeah, I was brought up on Jesus. I was raised to believe in the Bible. I went through confirmation. Catholics may know it as catechism. I was confirmed, the whole thing. I actually quite enjoyed it for the most part. Those were some of the happiest years of my life. Now, granted, a lot of that's due to the fact that I was a child through most of it. And when you're a child, you don't have any responsibilities. You don't have a job. Everything's pretty simple and great. Nevertheless, my time in Sunday school when I was little and my time spent in youth group when I was, from, the ages of 12 to 15, 16, whatever it was. Those were great years, and I had a lot of great experiences with my peers. Got to travel, got to do and see a lot of things that I maybe wouldn't have had the chance to do or see otherwise. And there was always this positivity around it because, there's a lot of bullshit in religion. There's some of the stuff where like, oh, you got to save people because you don't want anybody going to hell and all that stuff. But for the most part, it was all about love and peace and, being moral and good and whatever. As I got older, again, like after my, late teens and now I'm getting into my early 20s and I'm starting to get into drinking and getting into bands and stuff. I'd stopped going to church because, honestly, as I got older, you're sitting there in the congregation and you're listening to some dude read scripture, and a lot of that shit was just boring. Okay. Listening to stories that are clearly dated back, they're just speaking old English, and I'm in my early 20s. I'm not really interested in putting some of this stuff together, right? And John said unto him, be the... It all just sounded like garbled to me. I knew that, I believed in Jesus, I believed in God, and I knew the basics, right? But I didn't care for all the particulars. And a lot of that stuff was boring. And I was just frankly more interested in going home and playing video games or going to hang out with my friends or, so I took the bones of it and I held to that, but, I didn't bother like getting into like all the readings and that or whatever. It was not very interesting to me. But again, the main concept of God being real, heaven being real, Jesus, the devil, all that stuff, why we were here, what Jesus was all about, that stuff I all held on to. Up until about the age of, 25. When social media really started to take off with, MySpace and whatnot. And it was actually there, MySpace, that I started getting involved in internet forums, right? If you remember MySpace back in those days, there were different forums you could join. One of them that I joined was a group dedicated to atheism versus religion. It was basically a debate page where people would go online and argue with each other over whether God was real or not. And in spending time there, I was met with a lot of challenges. There were some intelligent people, or at least intelligent enough, to challenge my beliefs, make me question things. And most of the time, they did it with a great deal of respect. I remember there's one or two in particular. A lot of the times, they would come off, some of these people would come off, these atheist types, as very arrogant and condescending. And, when I would get into it with people like that, they didn't do a whole lot to shake me, right? I'm just like, oh, you're just a dick or whatever. But I'd be lying if I said that at times they didn't make me think and reconsider a few things, even the dicks. But it was the nice ones, of whom there were a few, who really showed me the way to have a conversation with people, the way to have a debate, the way to disagree and make a case for your side. And it was those types that kind of shattered my preconceived notion of what an atheist was. And being so sheltered and so in an echo chamber for the better part of, my past 20 some odd years, some of my beliefs were pretty much shaken to the point where I had to get rid of them. And I don't know if I can even get into specifics because right now I don't know. I don't remember any specific arguments or any specific beliefs or points that were made that really did it. And it certainly didn't happen overnight. But the long and short of it is that over time, after spending enough time in these discussions and gaining the nerve, the courage to actually look at the other side, to start actively questioning my faith. Listening to arguments from the likes of Richard Dawkins and Daniel Dennett and Christopher Hitchens and that. They kind of won me over. I started to kind of abandon the idea of having faith in anything, right? It's all about look, we can't measure this. We can't know this. Throw it away. We have to look at what's real, what's in front of us. We have to trust in science and this and that and the other. And it all started to make sense to me. And I'd say about from the age of, my mid to late 20s, all the way up until very, very recently, that was kind of my mindset. I started to read more. I started to learn more about science. I started to learn more about philosophy, different religions, different cultures, And yeah, I was pretty steadfast in my atheism for quite a while. I'm 43 now. Again, this started in my mid to late 20s. So for nearly 20 years, that's been kind of more or less my position. You know, I would hear stories about people that have had contact with angels or have had near-death experiences or who claim to go on some weird ayahuasca trip and see fucking spirits or whatever the fuck. And I chalked all that stuff up to just, listen, man, you're introducing chemicals into your brain, you're having hallucinations, you want to believe something, so you're visualizing it, whatever. None of this stuff was verifiable by science. So if you were not able to prove it, then there's no reason for me to believe it, so throw it away. And to a certain extent, that's still what I believe. But recently, I've begun to come full circle. Maybe not full circle. I certainly don't identify as a Christian today. Maybe I will again someday. But, and I have a hard time explaining it. And maybe I won't explain it right now. Again, this is really just me venting. I don't have this written out. I didn't put a lot of thought into this. For whatever reason, I feel compelled to speak on this right now at this moment. So here I am. So forgive me if I am unable to articulate certain things clearly, but whatever. The bottom line is, I really don't identify as an atheist anymore. Agnostic, maybe, and I know there, a lot of people have this idea that, there's atheists, there's agnostics, and agnostics are basically like kind of halfway to atheism, right? They're not quite there. They're not quite a Christian. They're not quite a believer. They're not quite an atheist. They're somewhere in the middle, and that's an agnostic. And really, that's not accurate. If you identify as an agnostic, you could be a Christian and agnostic. You believe, but you don't know. You're not willing to say that one can know, but this is what you believe. You can be an agnostic atheist. Say, well, I don't know, or I don't believe we can know, but my belief is that no, there is no God. So somebody who identifies as an atheist is making the claim that they do not believe in theology. There is not a God that they believe in. I do not believe in God. That's what it means to be an atheist. The term deals with belief. Whereas if one is an agnostic, well, that's an answer to a different question. Can we know? It deals with knowledge. And so one can be an agnostic and be a Christian, and one can be an agnostic and be an atheist. It's not mutually exclusive. But to speak in terms that most people understand, and because most people do understand that term, agnostic, as kind of, halfway between the two, fine, take it for whatever it is. I'm an agnostic, kind of, sort of. But I can feel myself believing in something. Again, I don't know. I don't know that we can know, so that makes me an agnostic, but I feel myself coming back to a belief in some sort of God, some sort of higher power, something beyond this life. And funnily enough, there's a couple things that brought me back to this. I'd be lying if I said that the birth of my firstborn son didn't have anything to do with it. And I understand and recognize that that is a bias. Now I have a stake in the game. Before I met my wife, before I had children, whatever happened to me happened to me. If I died, I died. I didn't want to die. I like being alive. But I wasn't really terribly concerned with what happens after I die. you know? Now I have 2 children, and I never knew, and I don't want to get sidetracked here, but just to speak on the word love for a minute, I didn't know what the word love meant. I thought I did, but I didn't. Not until I had children. Once my first son was born, that's when I understood, holy shit, this is indescribable. The amount of love that I feel, the way that I feel love for this child, it's different. You know, I love my wife. I love my parents. More than I can say. But the love that I feel for my wife, the love that I feel for my parents, it's not the same. There's a different component to that word, to that idea. When you're talking about your own children, there's an added element. And maybe it's a biological imperative, right? Maybe it's just, hey, we're kind of wired to feel that way because this is our offspring. They need our protection if they're going to survive. If we're going to pass our genes on successfully, then biologically it makes sense that we would want to protect them and we would have this greater degree of love for them. So I get that. Okay, that's not lost on me. Nevertheless, when my children were born, it really made me step back and reconsider what that word means, love. So again, that definitely had something to do with it. Because of course, now all of a sudden there's this desire to, maybe I'm an atheist, but man, I wish it were true. I wish I didn't have to face the fact that someday I'm going to die and leave them, or maybe they'll die and leave me. That's a horrible, horrible thought for me. Scares the shit out of me. So that maybe, if I'm being honest, that may have been the catalyst for me to start searching again, right? Like, I don't want to be an atheist anymore. I don't want to believe in nothing because I feel this, I don't know, this sense of dread or nihilism. That's not the whole of it, though. It's not just that, you know, I had a kid and now I'm afraid and, you know, whatever. The more that I learned about science and the more that I thought about it, the more that I thought about physics, be it, you know, general relativity, be it quantum mechanics, the more I thought about things as they are, according to science, that actually kind of helped. And I'll point to the thing that really stood out to me the most. I don't know how many of you are out there are familiar with a physicist by the name of Brian Greene. I watched something that he was doing on National Geographic, and I believe he's an atheist or whatever. So it's not like he's some Christian or anything, or he wasn't preaching anything. He's just explaining the illusion of time, explaining time as it relates to space, explaining Einstein's theory of general relativity, explaining the universe, as it were. And when he explained the way in which time actually works, you know, versus how we perceive it, he explained it in a way that showed that the past, the present, the future, they all exist. Just like space exists, it's finite. There's a beginning and there's an end to it. What we know as space. Time, it's the same way. They're interwoven, that you cannot remove one from the other. And, you know, there's a lot that I don't understand. And maybe I'm saying that wrong, but as I understand it, there is no time separate from space. It is space-time. So, as far back as science can show us, we have the Big Bang, the singularity, whatever. And eventually that will all end. We're not there yet, of course. I'm sitting here talking right now. But we are there. It has already happened. And the past is still happening. In some reality. And man, it's hard to explain it just through words if you don't understand it. And I mean, I'd be lying if I said I understood it completely, but again, without getting into all these details and without making myself sound like a fool trying to explain it, what I took from that was that, holy shit, the present is the past, and the past is the future, and it's all like, you imagine like a big loaf of bread, and you can slice it in a bunch of different directions, and depending on the angle at which you slice, see, I'm gonna trip all over. I'm gonna make a mess of this, and I got to pause right there. But basically, it got me to think differently about my place in space and in time. If the past still exists, and if the future has already happened, and it's all kind of dependent on one's perspective and spot in it, well, then that means that I sit and I look at my hand in front of me and I can move my fingers, right? I exist here now, physically. That much I know. But somewhere, in someone else's reality, I'm still like 5 years old. In someone else's reality, I haven't been born. And in another person's reality, I'm already dead. And rather than this experience of, we experience time as an arrow, right? Like you're moving down a river, flowing. And as you go down the river, you're passing by this tree and that tree. And maybe you see this rock and that rock. And eventually it all passes you by. And that's how we experience time. But just because I pass by that tree and I can't see it anymore doesn't mean it's not there anymore. It is. Our lives, reality as we know it, it all exists at all times, but we experience it like a river, or better analogy yet, like a record, right? Like a vinyl or like a movie. And I know this sounds a little bit dated, like a vinyl or a VHS tape or a reel of film, but think about a reel of film, for instance. It is a bunch of little, what you call it? I can't even think of the word. It's a bunch of images, right? In a loop on a tape. And it is the lens as those images pass by that gives us the illusion of action. We can watch a James Dean movie right now. James Dean's dead. But those cells, those film cells, they exist on that roll of film, and they are all just merely a bunch of still images. But when we hit play on that VCR, for those of you who still have a VCR, we are watching James Dean moving and talking and doing all these things. It's an illusion, though. And so I look at the universe and life much in the same way now, right? But what is this experience? Right now, I'm very aware, I am conscious that I'm sitting here with a phone in my hand talking to it. Somewhere else, in some other reality, from some other perspective, I haven't even picked the phone up yet. But that's still me. That is my body, but it's not me. I'm experiencing this now. What is this experience? And it ultimately goes back to, what is consciousness? What is the soul? Are they the same thing? And is that the needle on the record player? Is that the lens on the VCR? Whatever. Something is experiencing this biological life right now and is always aware of it. But I'm aware of it. When I say I don't know if I'm even who am I talking about? Am I talking about the biological life form, or am I talking about something else? Because this biological life form, so far as I'm aware, exists in multiple different spots in space and time. Yet, I can't experience 5 years old again. Not right now, I can at least. And I have yet to experience 58 years old. Or death. I'm not there yet. I will be. some other consciousness or needle or whatever you want to call it is there now, is experiencing my death and my birth. And I don't understand it, and maybe I've got it all wrong, but that really, just that kind of understanding of how space and time work also helped remove the idea of free will. And that's something that I know might sound counterintuitive to say, because I don't necessarily believe in free will. Not in the way that I think most people do. And a lot of people, I think, are scared by that notion because it takes away agency. But it, to me, and I've heard like people like Sam Harris argue against free will from a very different standpoint. Like, oh, well, we can hook you up to an MRI, or we can hook you up to these machines, and we can ask you a question, and we can see the synapses in your brain, and we can predict what you're going to say before you're even aware that you say it, so therefore you don't have free will. Fine, I don't care. I'm not even coming from that perspective. I'm coming from the perspective of what I just said. If the past, the present, and the future all exist simultaneously, always, well then my actions and the outcomes and results of those actions, they're already determined. Right? So what I think is free will, what I think is my choice, like my choice to be sitting here saying all these things right now, is another illusion. Seems to me. And I remember when I was a kid, one of the fundamental questions that I had about God was, well, if God knows everything, He knows you before you were born. He knows when you're going to die. He knows everything that you're going to do. So what is the point in any of this? What's the point in asking Him for things, or to pray to Him, or any of it? And I'm not saying I understand, because I don't. But what science tells us is more of the same. Like the past, the present, the future, they all exist. The universe already knows. It's already determined. God, universe, some people use those two words interchangeably. That's fine. Maybe I may someday too. I don't know. But it's an interesting thought. Like, at least for me, it's like, oh, well, I mean, I guess it makes sense. If we're to believe as Christians that God knows the past, the present, the future, He knows what you're going to do before you do it, well, then that does kind of by default remove some agency, some free will. But at the same time, one of the things that I struggle with is it doesn't really make any sense to live as though that were true, right? It doesn't make sense to live as though you have no free will. Because I don't know, I guess I still kind of believe in it in a way. I don't quite understand it though. Like, you can't just sit and think like, oh, well, it's not my choice, or what. If you allow that fact to influence your thinking, like, I don't know. I'm lost. Again, from the outset of the video, I said, I don't know what I'm going to say. I might come off sounding like a dummy, and I guess that's kind of what's happening right now. I'm not claiming to have any answers. I'm still, I guess I would consider myself a seeker. I'm trying to figure things out. And this is evidence of it, because I don't really know what to make of any of that. But I guess ultimately what I'm getting at is that if everything I said in the last couple minutes holds true, then there is something beyond this biology that is experiencing this biology. Consciousness, a soul, what is it? And I remember, I've never studied Buddhism or anything. I'm not going to pretend to know anything about it, but I remember a comedy bit by the late Bill Hicks. And what I remember of it was talking about how he was on an acid trip and realized that we are all one, that there is no difference between you and me. I think he may have even mentioned, like, Jesus saying, love your neighbor as yourself, because he is yourself. You are the same. And this is all just a ride. And that kind of jives with the notion that this is all like the past, the present, the future, all this. It's already been determined. It's already there. And we're just experiencing it. What we are is an experience. That awareness. That experience, it's when the body expires, that whatever it is that's experiencing that body has to go elsewhere, right? Because there's nothing left. It's all super confusing to me. I don't know, but I am now at the point in my life where I am very skeptical of the notion that we are merely our brains. We are our biology and nothing more. At the same time, we kind of are. I know it's fucked up. It's fucked up. So I'm trying to make sense of it. I just don't think, because I think a lot of atheists too, like I haven't had many conversations with non-believers in which they even think in this way. That, most of us are fooled by the arrow of time. Even the geniuses among us, the scholars, the scientists, not all of them, but we all kind of get trapped into this illusion. We all have this, because we are all experiencing this biological life form, which is imperfect and easily influenced by its own biology, by nature, by our surroundings, by our limitations. So even the brightest among us don't necessarily have all the answers. But I don't know that we're supposed to. And I think that's where being humble, showing humility, and I feel like I'm about to say some things that are contradictory to the other things that I've said. Whatever. Call me out on it. Don't. Again, I'm just venting. I'm just emptying my head. And I already lost track of what the hell I was just about to say. I don't know. I think that prayer, a lot of the things that were taught to me when I was a child. And I remember having arguments with friends about like the nature, because I would talk to my friends about the things that I would learn in church. Some of my friends, most of whom were not religious, that would argue and push back on some of the things that I would say. And I remember one of the pushbacks I got from a friend that I had when I was a teenager was, why should you have to go and confess your sins? And you're having to admit out loud that you're by nature sinful and unclean and undeserving of heaven, and you deserve, hell or whatever. That's crazy. That's sick. Well, I think when I think about that sort of thing now, it helps keep you humble. And I think that's important. To understand that we are imperfect. I don't care if you're an atheist, a Christian, a Buddhist, or what. We are imperfect. I don't think anybody can really argue that. We all have, for the lack of a better term, impure thoughts. And we do things that we regret. All of us. I don't know a person on earth who hasn't. And we're also limited by our mammalian brains. We have, sexual urges that get us into trouble, addictions that get us into trouble. We are victims of our own nature. And I think it's important to keep sight of that, lest you start to think you're better than you actually are, where this is where like psychopaths come from, right? You start to think that you have all the answers and that you know better than everybody else and that you can do no wrong. We see where that kind of leads. So I think that is important to confess sins, or to not lose sight of your lowly nature. I think that's a very beneficial thing. Of course, you don't want to sit and beat yourself up all day. That's no good either. You're just going to wind up depressed. But I think having faith helps to combat depression. And one of the things that really can help with that is to believe in something bigger than yourself. Right? There are things that you can learn in this life and experience in this life that even if you're not a believer, that can pay off. But if you are a believer, I mean, sure, you can believe that there's something better to aspire to. And of course, none of us are dealt an equal hand at birth. None of us get to choose our parents, where we're born, at least not as far as I'm aware. And so I don't know, I'm leaning into this notion, and I don't know that I can explain it, but like that these days I'm starting to believe that we are here on earth to learn, to have experiences that you will not have in a heavenly realm or in a cosmic realm, however you want to frame it. Because there will be no pain. There will be no suffering or sadness. That's everybody that I've ever heard of that has ever had a near-death experience or had some kind of experience like that, they all say the same thing. Love, positivity. It's and a lot of that I would write off in the past as just, hippy-dippy nonsense. These people were hallucinating, this, that, and I'm not so sure anymore, but I don't want to get kind of sidetracked into that conversation. I just feel like you can't know hot without cold. You can't know light without dark. You can't know love without hate or sorrow or sadness. In order to fully understand what love is, you have to know suffering. You have to know disappointment, sadness, hate, whatever the antithesis of love is. And it may be a collection of all those negative things. Because if you don't, then love is just the default state and it means nothing. If there's no such thing as darkness, then light means nothing. It's just the default. And so again, I don't want to sit and pretend that I have any answers, much less all of them. Anybody who's telling you they have all the answers is full of shit, most likely. But I can feel myself, just as I felt myself being pulled away from God, as I, ventured into my experience as an atheist. I can feel myself being pulled away from my atheism and starting to kind of come around to the idea of something beyond science, something beyond human, earthly explanation. And no, I can't define it, and I can't prove it. And yeah, I know, and I know there are people out there, if you're listening to this, that are going to think, oh, well, what a convenient cop-out. And I would think that way too. Well, we can't have a conversation about it because you have no way of offering up evidence to back up your claims. And you're right. I mean, of course I don't. There is no earthly or biological evidence necessarily. It's just, but the thing is, and I don't think any atheist, religious person, and nobody can argue that this one thing, which is that, again, we are imperfect. Our knowledge is limited. We are apes. And that's something I think almost any atheist or non-believer or non-theist or whatever, anti-theist can relate to, is that we are apes. We are apes that got lucky. To put it in those terms, right? We are highly advanced, quote unquote, monkeys. I know we're not monkeys, but we're mammals, not gods. And if that's the case, as miraculous and as wonderful as all of our scientific tools and methods are, as far as they have gotten us, they are only as good as the humans that create and practice them. Which is to say, they're very limited. And you may be comfortable with calling it good, saying, okay, fine, fair enough. Science cannot answer everything, but who says we have to? Okay, fine. Like, I'm not issuing any challenges or anything, right? And as far as science can tell us, this is the one life we have. There's no measurement we can take or equation that we can come up with, at least currently, that can point us to heaven or hell or any spiritual realm or some weird parallel universe or reality, right? Our tools are limited to what we can measure and observe around us. But that does not mean that there isn't a reality in a world, an existence, an experience outside those parameters. And again, I am as skeptical as anyone when it comes to any claims of knowledge regarding those exterior parameters, those experiences that cannot be measured. I'm always skeptical of it because I can't know it. You can't prove it. It's something that, if it is to be discovered, has to be discovered. Again, I hate to use this hippy-dippy language, from within. And here I am about to contradict myself and everything that I've just said by saying I'm trying to find that through logic, of course. And I don't know that I can do it. But a little more than logic. You do have to kind of pray and hope for a miracle, for some kind of revelation. But I'm open to it. And not only am I open to it, I'm looking for it. Because I'll be honest, look, I was happier when I was a Christian. When I was a believer, I was happier. And that could be for reasons that have nothing to do with belief or atheism or any of that. It stands to reason that you were happier when you didn't have as many responsibilities, right? Before you became cynical, before the world kind of beat you into submission. I don't know. At this point, I feel like I'm kind of just rambling, but I guess that's kind of the whole thing, right? That was what I kind of set out to do, is just, like I said, empty my head. I don't know how much more I can shake out right now. But I'll come back and talk about it some more. It feels good. That's the other thing. It feels good to just talk, to just say it, to get it out. Up to this point in my life, that's another thing. I'm always so worried about being right. Worried about saying the wrong thing. Worried about looking like an idiot. If I say this and it's not factually correct, somebody's going to correct me on it and it's going to be embarrassing. What the hell with that? So what? Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I come off like an idiot. Or maybe I don't. I don't know. Maybe somebody can get something out of this. And if somebody gets something out of this, then it's that feeling of responsibility, though, that I have, right? If I don't want to influence somebody the wrong way. Somebody, yeah, I actually agree with that. And then it's I kind of lead them down the wrong path. I don't know. And I think that there is a certain level of responsibility that all content creators have. If you're putting something out there in the world that's offering information to others, you have to kind of consider what kind of impact that information might have. Fortunately for me here on this channel, currently I have 13 subscribers. So at most, I might impact a handful of people at best. And that's very, very wishful thinking. So I do kind of feel that bit of freedom that, really nobody's listening to this. But anyway, maybe you did get something out of it. Maybe I will come back and expand on this further. Maybe you'll challenge me. Maybe you'll ask me a question that will prompt something. I don't know. But again, it did feel good for me to kind of get some of this off my chest and get that information out there. And I'll leave it at that for now. See you in the next one.